All right, I'd like to thank everyone for coming. This is a YIVO fellowship lecture, actually the second one we've ever done online. So thanks to all of you for attending. And also I could just add that if you like what you see and if you enjoy YIVO fellowship lectures and our other lectures, please consider making a donation to YIVO and also consider becoming a member. This is a good way to support YIVO and the work that it does, and it also helps you stay abreast of all of YIVO's activities, which are now legion online. So our lecturer today is Kalman Weiser. Professor Weiser is the Zilber Family Professor of Modern Jewish Studies at York University in Toronto, where he has taught since 2002. He received his PhD in Yiddish Studies at Columbia University and is the author of several studies about Jewish nationalism. Wow, I almost went with Yiddish nationalism. It's close. Author of several studies about Jewish nationalism and Yiddish linguistics and culture, especially in Eastern Europe. His book, Jewish People, Yiddish Nation, Noach Perlutsky and the Focus in Poland, won the 2012 Canadian Jewish Book Award for scholarship. Most recently, he co-edited a revised and expanded edition of a seminal work of Yiddish scholarship, Solomon Birnbaum's Yiddish, A Survey in Grammar. His current research is about Nazi scholars of Yiddish and their relationships with Jewish colleagues before, during, and after World War II, and that's what he'll be speaking about today. I'd also like to add that Professor Weiser is the recipient of YIVO's Workmen Circle, Dr. Emanuel Patt Visiting Professorship in Eastern European Jewish Studies. And his lecture today is entitled Confronting Hitler's Professors, Max Weinreich, Solomon Birnbaum, and the Legacy of the Holocaust. So welcome, Kalman, and let's begin.
Kalman Weiser, I'm speaking to you. Kalman Weiser, I'm speaking to you from my home in Toronto. I'm professor of modern Jewish history at York University here in Toronto. Before I begin, I'd like to thank all of you for listening to this lecture. I'd also like to express my deep gratitude to YIVO for providing me with a fellowship to conduct my research. What you're going to hear today is part of a larger project about the Yiddish scholars Salomon Birnbaum and Max Weinreich. Their relationship over decades, including their relationship to German language scholarship about Yiddish and Germany itself. So I'm going to get started. I'm going to remove my face from this and start my PowerPoint presentation. In 2018, Library and Archives Canada acquired a volume from Hitler's personal library that was a chilling reminder of Nazi Germany's ambition in general and the role of scholarship in its war against the Jews in particular. This is what you see here in this image. The 137-page book, whose German title translates as Statistics, Media, and Organizations of Jewry in the United States and Canada, was published in 1944. The contemporary Canadian press identified the book's compiler, Heinz Kloss, here pictured on the right, as a linguist with contacts to Nazi sympathizers in North America. What escaped its attention, however, was that Kloss was not merely a linguist. He was a leader in the fields of linguistic minority rights and bilingualism, who produced studies for the United Nations and was a fellow at the Center for Research on Bilingualism at l'Université Laval in Quebec in the late 1960s. While Yiddish was not the focus of his research over his long and prolific career, Kloss authored a number of articles about it. Indeed, some of the information contained in his guide to North American Jewry was in fact obtained with the help of Jewish scholars Max Weinreich and Solomon Birnbaum, who assisted Kloss in his Yiddish research prior to Hitler's rise to power. Moreover, it was the Yiddishist Joshua Fishman, Weinreich's student and himself a pioneer in the field of the sociology of language, who helped to bring Kloss's work to the attention of an English-speaking audience in the 1960s. Fishman was unaware of the extent of Kloss's Nazi past, a subject that has not yet been fully explored. Kloss was, of course, but one of a number of scholars with a pre-World War II interest in Jews and Judaica who served the Third Reich and carried on their academic careers after the defeat of Nazi Germany. He was, however, one of the few with a serious and abiding research interest in Yiddish. Far less well known among contemporary scholars, but a much more important contributor to the field of Yiddish linguistics was his colleague Franz Beranek. Beranek, a specialist in German linguistics and folklore, would go on to become Germany's first professor of Yiddish in the post-World War II era. It is on Beranek's relationship with Jewish scholars of Yiddish, specifically Weinreich and Birnbaum, that I will focus in my remarks today. In late June 1946, Max Weinreich, a co-founder and guiding spirit of the Yiddish Scientific Institute, YIVO, received word in New York City that Franz Beranek was looking for him. From Bellstadt, Germany, Beranek had inquired with an office for Jewish refugees in Geneva about the welfare of Weinreich and other YIVO workers. By coincidence, only a few months earlier, Weinreich had asked in a letter to his son Uriel, who was then a US Army soldier in Germany, that he seek out Beranek's 1941 book, Die Jiddische Mundart Nordost-Ungarns. This was a study of the phonology of Yiddish in Carpatho-Ruthenia, a region annexed by Hungary in 1939 after the dismantlement of Czechoslovakia. While he needed the book, Weinreich spurned the book's author. Weinreich wrote to his son, "My demand would be to tell him that the government that paid him murdered the largest part of those people and to try him for complicity." Who was Franz Beranek? As if anticipating this question, Weinreich explained that he was an ethnic German expelled from Czechoslovakia in the wake of the collapse of Nazi Germany. When we knew him, Weinreich wrote, he was a teacher in a German gymnasium in the Sudetenland. Until 1945, was a docent in the German University in Prague. That is, he was one of Hitler's professors. He worked on Yiddish dialectology. In 1939, YIVO was in the process of publishing one of his studies about Yiddish in Carpatho-Ruthenia. In 1935, he was even with us at the YIVO World Conference in Vilna. Now I suspect that some Hitler Institute sent him. Now what you see in the picture here, of course, on the right is Franz Beranek. On the left, you see a picture of the partition of Czechoslovakia. The easternmost part of the former Czechoslovakia is Carpatho-Ruthenia, the area about whose Yiddish Beranek was writing, an area that was annexed by Hungary during this time. Max Weinreich lost nearly everyone and everything of importance to him during World War II. Almost miraculously, his wife and younger son managed to join him and Uriel in New York City during the war. But his firstborn, the YIVO Institute in Vilna, Poland, here pictured on the left, along with its personnel and much of its collections, fell victim to the Nazis and their accomplices. Here, of course, you see the destroyed YIVO on the right. A refugee in 1940s New York City, Weinreich channeled his turbulent emotions into feverish industry. He was consumed with the task of transforming YIVO's American branch into its world headquarters and adapting its academic mission to the post-Holocaust reality in North America. For Weinreich, the contributions of German academics to the systematic destruction of Jewish lives and culture was not only a cause of limitless pain, it was also the source of a profound sense of personal betrayal. Among those who had lent their support to the Hitler regime were his mentors and colleagues at German language universities, as well as those to whom YIVO had provided moral, intellectual, and material support. In the early months of 1946, Weinreich was putting the finishing touches on his book, Hitler's Professors, the part of scholarship in Germany's crimes against the Jewish people, which was published in both Yiddish and English. The study was prepared for use in the Nuremberg trials. It represents a radical departure from the studies of Yiddish language and the sociology and psychology of Eastern European Jewry, with which Weinreich had earned an international reputation. Published less than a year after the war's end, Hitler's Professors relied on Nazi publications collected by YIVO during the war and captured archival materials to indict collectively the academics of the Third Reich for their contribution in providing the intellectual foundations and legitimization for the recent genocide of European Jewry. For Weinreich, these scholars had willfully perverted the purpose of Judaica scholarship. They had transformed it from an instrument for the sake of improving Jewish lives into one for the express purpose of destroying them. That Beranek's name does not appear in the book only suggests that Weinreich did not consider him important enough a villain and had not yet managed to collect sufficient documentation about his wartime activities. What you see in this picture, of course, is the cover of the recent English language edition of the book and an article from the foldouts that I will speak about later in which Weinreich confronted Beranek. Anticipating scholar Daniel Goldhagen's controversial thesis about the uniqueness of eliminationist anti-Semitism in Germany, Weinreich maintained that, quote, burning of 6 million men, women, and children, end quote, was a specifically German phenomenon for which there was little contrition among a population bearing collective guilt. The involvement of scholars lay not merely in the nature of the totalitarian state, as some of his colleagues argued. Weinreich countered that, quote, the Germans are the only nation in the world to produce scholarship that contributed more to annihilation than required of it, end quote. While he accepted that there were also what he called decent Germans, they were vastly outnumbered in his estimation by those who had participated in murder or given their silent consent. Now, since the 1990s, a growing body of scholarship has followed in Weinreich's pioneering footsteps to consider the contributions of German Judaica scholars to Hitler's final solution and the thorny questions of how to evaluate their actions and motivations, as well as the post-war reception of implicated individuals and their scholarship. Yet, the post-war responses of Jewish scholars of Judaica to their erstwhile colleagues has received less attention. This applies especially for the small field of Yiddish, whose surviving European scholars mourned not only the victims of genocide, but were forced to reckon with the accelerated decline of the language and culture to which they had devoted their lives once its Eastern European demographic base had been destroyed. Max Weinreich's opprobrium was not limited to scholars who had engaged in so-called Judenforschung. That is, it was not limited to those who had conducted research for Nazi and Nazified institutions bearing the appearance of objective scholarship, but whose conclusions were subordinate to the dictates of anti-Semitic ideology. Weinreich questioned all German researchers who approached him about their activities during the war and refused contact with any who could not demonstrate to his satisfaction their distance from the Third Reich's institutions. His position was long YIVO's official one, and his stature in the field also influenced scholars outside of YIVO. His position was, however, not the only one among Jewish scholars of Yiddish, nor was it the only position held privately by those active in YIVO. It contrasts strikingly with that of his colleague Solomon Birnbaum. The two most accomplished Yiddish linguists of their generation, Weinreich and Birnbaum, were products of the same German academic tradition and found refuge from Nazi Germany's aggressive policies in the Anglophone world, Weinreich in New York and Birnbaum in London. Yet Birnbaum not only aided Beranek after World War II, but mentored a new generation of German scholars of Yiddish who came of age after the fall of the Nazi regime, thereby helping to establish post-war Germany as a center for Yiddish research. In his final years, Birnbaum traveled to Trier, Germany, to accept an honorary doctorate in recognition of a lifetime of contributions to the field of Yiddish. Salomon Birnbaum, who is pictured here on the left with his father Nathan Birnbaum and his son Jacob, and on the right with his brother Menachem, with his brother Menachem's wife Tina, and with Max Weinreich's wife Regina in Hamburg. Solomon Birnbaum grew up in Vienna, apart from a few years in Czernowitz during high school. He was the eldest son of Nathan Birnbaum, the famous Jewish thinker and activist, who was the chief organizer of the Yiddish language conference held in Czernowitz in 1908. Like Weinreich, who was born in today's Latvia, Solomon Birnbaum was a native speaker of German who acquired near-native facility in Yiddish as an adolescent and wrote his doctorate about Yiddish in a German university. For him, too, the language and its culture was more than merely a subject of scholarly interest. He was, however, not a Yiddishist like Weinreich and other YIVO scholars in the sense of being a secular nationalist. The language was rather part of a larger commitment to religious orthodoxy as the reason for and guarantor of Jewish uniqueness. Yiddish, he maintained, had come into being as the expression of Ashkenazic Jews' all-encompassing religious cultural way of life. The goal of the predominantly leftist Yiddishist movement to transform a language that had for centuries conveyed religious thought and feeling into an instrument of consciously secular culture smacked to him of assimilation, if not idolatry. Philological coupled with practical interest in Yiddish in the aftermath of World War I helped to create the circumstances for a lector position in Yiddish that Birnbaum held at the University of Hamburg from 1922 until 1933. What you see in the photo on the right, in fact, is when Weinreich came with Menachem Birnbaum from Berlin, they lived together, to visit Solomon Birnbaum in Hamburg in the early 1920s. The position that Solomon Birnbaum occupied in Hamburg was the first position of its kind in a modern European university, but its poor pay was inadequate to meet the needs of a man with a growing family. Moreover, Birnbaum's career advancement was blocked by collegial jealousy and lack of widespread acceptance of the field of Yiddish in German academia. Birnbaum therefore invested tremendous time and effort in the late 1920s into promoting a plan to create a chair for Yiddish as part of a proposed institute for closely related Germanic languages, such as Dutch, Afrikaans, Pennsylvania German, Frisian, and Yiddish. The author of the plan was Heinz Kloss, a young researcher for the private German Ausland Institute, or German Foreign Institute. Kloss's goal was to help strengthen Germany's economic and cultural position globally after losing its empire and much of its influence as a result of World War I, by promoting cooperation between millions of speakers of Germanic languages around the world. Birnbaum provided invaluable scholarly assistance to Kloss, who failed to acknowledge Birnbaum's contributions in his publications. What you see here is Kloss's pamphlet, his brochure, Nebensprachen, languages, his plan to create an institute for closely related languages for which he received much assistance from Birnbaum, but did not acknowledge him. When Kloss's plans faltered, Birnbaum attempted himself to found an institute for the study of Yiddish and Ashkenazic culture in Germany. Decades later, he would recall with satisfaction that some 80 non-Jewish scholars had lent their public support to his project, even after Hitler's coming to power in early 1933. Not a few of them later joined the Nazi Party or exhibited strong pro-Nazi sympathies. Birnbaum was not likely fully aware of this and never commented about it in public. He no doubt understood, however, that his colleagues' motivations were varied and complex. Among those who felt pressured to express support for the regime, for example, was a dear friend, Heinrich Benfei, who had been a vocal opponent of anti-Semitism and had in fact assumed the surname of his first Jewish wife. Birnbaum fled Germany for Holland in May 1933 and then took refuge with his family in England, where his wife, Irene Elena, had been born. With great effort, he managed to establish himself at the University of London as a lecturer in two areas, Hebrew paleography and epigraphy, and in Yiddish. What you see here is a photo of the family with all the children but the youngest, David, who was born in England. This photo was taken in Germany shortly before Hitler came to power. David was born later in England. From London, Birnbaum maintained relationships with scholars in the German-speaking world and beyond. Among those with whom he generously shared his expertise and publications in the 1930s was Franz Beranek, a young Bohemian scholar whose research focused on German dialects spoken in enclaves in or neighboring non-German language territory. Beranek related how he planned to conduct research about dialects of colonial German and of Yiddish during a vacation in Carpathian Ruthenia in 1933. But his primary interest in Yiddish resided in its nearly extinct Western branch, which, he noted, was still recalled among the older generation of Jews in the Sudetenland. Beranek lamented his intellectual isolation and the lack of resources for his work about what he called this highly interesting speech form of German. According to him, his work on Yiddish earned him only condescending smiles from professors of German philology at the German University in Prague. Beranek and Birnbaum exchanged a few letters prior to World War II. Birnbaum was thus greatly surprised in the summer of 1947 when he noticed an announcement in an American journal about Beranek's book about Yiddish in the easternmost part of pre-World War II Czechoslovakia. What particularly piqued his interest was the publication date, 1941, in the thick of the war. Birnbaum was eager to learn the circumstances of the book's publication, its scholarly reception, and its consequences for the author. He therefore welcomed a letter from Beranek, reintroducing himself soon afterwards. While making no explicit mention of the Holocaust, Beranek expressed in his letter the hope that Birnbaum had, quote, placed the past evil years behind him, end quote. He explained that he had been a docent at the German Charles University in Prague until 1945, when he was driven from his home and forced to leave behind his library and research materials. Now a high school teacher in small-town Hessen, Germany, he lacked adequate access to an appropriate research library. He implored Birnbaum to update him about events in the field of Yiddish and to share duplicates of published works with him. He also shared his ambitious plan for research and hopes with Birnbaum's support to attract German government support for Yiddish research. Beranek noted that he had written twice to YIVO in New York and once personally to Max Weinreich, but never received a response. Anticipating the reason for this silence, Beranek requested that Birnbaum himself intercede on his behalf. He wrote to Birnbaum, quote, "I can naturally understand to a degree if one wants to know nothing of official circles from Germany, but I would appreciate if an exception could be made for me, the only person with a scholarly interest in Yiddish in Germany today." End quote. Birnbaum obliged by writing to YIVO. In late June 1948, he dutifully relayed the results of his inquiry to Beranek. The reasons for YIVO's negative attitude, he reported, are that your study was printed with the support of the Reichsinstitut für Geschichte des Neuen Deutschlands, that you speak in the foreword of the necessity of the new Germany, studying all things connected with Jews, that you advanced professionally during the war, that you drew a salary from the government that exterminated the Jewish people, that you expressed your gratitude to the Institute and its president, Walter Frank, at the end of the foreword. End quote. In short, YIVO objected to Beranek's involvement with an institution devoted to anti-Semitic Judenforschung. Founded in 1935 to encourage historical research from a National Socialist perspective, Walter Frank's Reichsinstitut for the History of the New Germany competed with Alfred Rosenberg's notorious Institute for Research on the Jewish Question for dominance in the field of Nazi scholarship about the Jewish question. Birnbaum had himself spent the war years conducting top-secret work in the Uncommon Languages Division under the auspices of the British War Office. There he read thousands of letters written in Jewish languages to help the British obtain useful information for the war effort and about conditions in occupied lands. He was thus painfully aware of events in Europe and elsewhere throughout the war, including the suffering of his own relatives. Only after the war, however, did he obtain confirmation of the death of his brother Menachem, a talented illustrator, and of Menachem's family in Sobibor. And here you see a photo on the left of Menachem, an example of one of his illustrations. Birnbaum wrote the following to Beranek. "It is obviously not easy for you there to understand to what extent one must understand the negative attitude of Jewish circles for everything connected to Germany. The blood and torture of 6 million, and among them fathers, mothers, brothers, sisters, sons, daughters, are something that, apart from other feelings, dictates a natural attitude of mistrust of every German, even when it is known that there were opponents of the Nazis, for a long time. All the more so when, on the one hand, the religious man hears nothing of a great and deep remorse among the German people, and on the other hand, every observer of natural fact sees that the great mass of Nazis and other Jew haters is still there, has not given up its views, and sooner rather than later would like to repeat it all." End quote. Beranek did not reject any of these accusations, other than that his career had advanced during the war. Nor did he deny the validity of such feelings, but he felt, as he put it, much looks different from the other side of the Atlantic. He maintained that Weinreich's position was unjustly simplistic, as it reflected a deep lack of understanding for the position of the individual in the Nazi dictatorship. He hoped that from Birnbaum he could expect what he called, quote, "a certain degree of understanding as far as authoritative circles were concerned, for the very difficult and above all highly differentiated situation in Germany during the past years." End quote. Far from being an agent of Nazi persecution of the Jews, Beranek understood himself as a victim. First of discrimination against the German minority in interwar Czechoslovakia, Secondly, of the pro-Nazi Sudeten German Party that granted him only a very inferior high school teaching position in 1938 because he was not a party member. Thirdly, of the Nazi state itself. He alleged that Nazi Germany had reproached him with his Judenfreundlich, his Jew-friendly orientation, his philo-Semitic orientation of his research, placed him under surveillance, and prevented him from becoming a professor. Fourthly, he was a victim of the indiscriminate expulsion of ethnic Germans from Czechoslovakia after World War II. And finally, he was a continuing victim of Jewish prejudice. His choice of a publisher for his study of Carpatho-Ruthenian Yiddish was not a reflection of allegiance to Nazi ideology, he maintained. Rather, it reflected a mixture of idealism and pragmatism. Offering thanks to the Nazi Walter Frank, whom he never met, was an unavoidable act of courtesy. In Beranek's words, "I was referred to the Reichsinstitute and its funding, which is all that mattered to me. The amazing thing happened. It defrayed all the costs of publication. When I wrote in the introduction that everything connected to Jews must be researched, it is clear from content and context what I meant. Not economic and other matters always concerning Jewification, but literally the unique cultural foundations of Judaism, above all, the Yiddish language. While seemingly towing the official line, I offered an invitation to a new land that lies far from politics and hate." In the end, Beranek continued, the book found favor neither with the Nazi Party nor with reviewers. He asked Birnbaum, "Can he who reproaches me tell me what I should have done? To leave service and enter a concentration camp?" Beranek maintained that, in his words, he did not lack courage despite that I was an employee of the state. This could be confirmed by his continuing to correspond with YIVO until 1940, and by a statement affirming that he had intervened on behalf of a Mischling student disciplined for his Jewish descent. Finally, to make matters worse, prior to his expulsion from Czechoslovakia, a Jewish functionary had confiscated Beranek's scholarly materials. Birnbaum was certainly no stranger to Nazi brutality and coercion. As he explained to his sons years later, ordinary people living under such a horrible regime were little inclined to be heroes. He professed his full understanding for both Beranek's and Weinreich's apparently irreconcilable positions. Nonetheless, it is difficult not to hear a tone of reproach in Birnbaum's words when he adds, "Perhaps you can empathize precisely because you know yourself to be an anti-Nazi who demonstrated personal courage against the Nazis, and yet you are indignant not to be recognized for it by the Yiddish Scientific Institute." Beranek thanked Birnbaum for his efforts and affirmed his commitment to what he called the cause of Yiddish research. With a tone of resignation, he noted his worry that, quote, "the gap between YIVO's work and mine will only grow deeper and prove more calamitous than that between the so-called Western and Eastern European scholarship," end quote. This was their last exchange concerning Beranek's World War II activities and his relationship with YIVO, although their correspondence continued nearly until Beranek's death in 1967. Birnbaum contributed a small notice to the journal Mitteilungen aus dem Arbeitskreis für Jiddistik, which Birnbaum launched and edited from 1955 to 1964. The first of its kind in Germany, the journal which you see here on the left, aimed to promote research about Yiddish among German-speaking academics and to generate support for the creation of a chair for the language in a German university. In an oblique reference to collective responsibility for the Holocaust, Beranek called upon German scholars in the journal's inaugural issue to preserve the language before it disappeared, and in recognition of what he called, quote, the disastrous role in its decline with which fate has burdened the German people, end quote. The journal, he announced, would hopefully be a step toward intellectual reconciliation between Jews and Germans. On the right, you see the cover page of another work about Yiddish that I will talk about a little later called Das Pinske Yiddish. In the following issue, Heinz Kloss, now an employee of West Germany's Institute for International Relations, similarly wrote of Germany's duty to, quote, care for the remnants of Yiddish language culture and its carriers in order to help reduce the alienation between Germans and Jews, end quote. The journal also included a list of scholars who endorsed its work. Among them were several who had been active in Nazi research and academic networks. This includes Johannes Poll, pictured on the right, today well known for his role in pillaging YIVO's collections and forcing its scholars to sort materials and conduct research as slave laborers in the service of the notorious Rosenberg Stab. And of course, you can read more about this in David Fishman's recent book, pictured on the left, The Book Smugglers. It is unlikely that Birnbaum was wholly convinced by Beranek's explanations, even if he believed it possible that Beranek was not an ideological Nazi. Among the letters in the Beranek-Birnbaum correspondence lies an article from the New York Yiddish Vorwärts titled The Excuses of the German Yiddish Researcher Franz Beranek. The article appeared in March 1956, written by Max Weinreich under one of his regular pseudonyms. Birnbaum was thus at least aware of the acrimonious exchange that occurred between Weinreich and Beranek on the page of the Vorwärts after it published an article about Beranek's Yiddish Studies Journal. Here you see Die Terutzen von dem deutschen Jiddisch-Forscher Beranek, written by P. Berman, which was one of Max Weinreich's usual pseudonyms in the Vorwärts. Weinreich denounced Birnbaum in two articles in the Vorwärts for what he considered the scholar's ample complicity with the Nazi regime, repeating the accusations he had leveled against him almost a decade earlier via Birnbaum. Dripping with sarcasm, the articles attacked one by one Beranek's defenses of his wartime activities and condemned his alleged goals in promoting Yiddish as self-serving lies and distortions. According to Weinreich, they were an attempt to whitewash his conduct and to create a position in Yiddish for himself. Referring to Nazi documents, Weinreich pointed out that Beranek had enthusiastically agreed to attend a Nazi-sponsored academic conference for Eastern questions and recommended that his wife, a researcher for the SS, be invited too. He also contributed a book review to Nazi ideologue Alfred Rosenberg's anti-Semitic journal Weltkampf. His denazification certificate, issued by a German court, was in Weinreich's opinion simply laughable. And this is what you see on the left. So was a copy that Beranek had himself typed of a letter by a student of Jewish descent affirming that Beranek had treated him decently. This is the letter on the right. Despite Beranek's claims that his Yiddish-related publications made him suspect in the party's eyes and endangered him, Weinreich continued, Beranek was able to advance from the rank of a high school teacher in 1938 to assistant professor and assume a position for German folklore at the German Charles University in Prague in 1944. Further, Beranek unselfconsciously used tainted Nazi terminology in attempts to defend himself. While discrediting Beranek was his primary concern, Weinreich also drew attention to another contributor to Beranek's journal with pre-war ties to YIVO and to Birnbaum, the aforementioned Heinz Kloss of the Nazified German Foreign Institute. In Beranek's rebuttal published in the Vorwärts, he did not categorically deny any of the information that Weinreich presented, other than the accusation that he hoped to receive money from foreign Jews to finance a Yiddish chair for himself. Indeed, he revealed that he had been a Nazi Party member, but denied having any offices or functions in the party. But he disputed the interpretation of his record, rejecting Weinreich's accusations with more or less the same arguments that he gave in his letters to Birnbaum. Moreover, he elevated the publication of his 1941 study from a pragmatic act to a badge of honor. In his telling, he had managed to dupe an anti-Semitic research institute into publishing a non-anti-Semitic study. The book's essentially benign introduction was a cleverly executed ploy to satisfy his patrons without harming Jews. While YIVO circles treated him with undeserved enmity, other Jewish scholars, among them Birnbaum, recognized the baselessness of such accusations that did not sever ties with him. Further, he accused YIVO of contacting him through intermediaries in the last 10 years whenever it needed him. Now, what does one make of Franz Beranek's accounting for his wartime career and Jewish responses to it? Beranek was certainly not the only scholar with a Nazi background to maintain a career in post-war German academia. He distinguishes himself, however, with what impresses as either sheer effrontery or utter detachment from reality by seeking to reestablish relations with Jewish scholars and to rebuild his career with their assistance immediately after the war. To the contemporary researcher, it is clear that Weinreich was essentially correct. Beranek omitted, decontextualized, and distorted, indeed outright lied, about portions of his biography while reacting with indignation to Weinreich's accusations and insisting upon his own status as a victim and hero. What Weinreich was perhaps unaware of was the staggering extent to which Beranek had done so. By many accounts, including Nazi ones, Beranek rubbed others the wrong way with his arrogance, aggressive ambition, and insensitivity to others. But he was deemed by Reich officials an eminently competent scholar and politically reliable. As early as 1933, while he conducted his research in Carpatho-Ruthenia, Czechoslovak police kept him under surveillance as a strident German nationalist suspected of activity on behalf of Nazi Germany. He not only joined the Nazi Party in 1938, but was also a staff sergeant and press officer in the SA. His personal correspondence makes clear that he sought a research position in German-occupied Poland or anywhere else that would free him from teaching responsibilities and permit him to conduct the work he considered most important. Indeed, he was later given leave from his high school teaching job in 1942 to 1943 to direct research at a German research institute in Slovakia. The purpose of the institute was to stress the history of pre-Slavic German settlement in the region, thereby justifying German hegemony and eventually absorption into the Reich. Beranek did indeed draw the attention of the SD, the intelligence agency of the SS, but not in connection with pro-Jewish activities. Rather, the cause was interpersonal frictions among personnel at the institute in Slovakia, leading to his removal from it. The SD also conducted a background check when a project was to be entrusted to Beranek by the Institute for the Research of the Jewish Question. Indeed, far from suffering for his interest in Yiddish, Beranek was recommended to become a Yiddish and Slavic specialist at the anti-Semitic Institut für Deutsche Ostarbeit in Krakow. Its director reviewed his 1941 book about Yiddish quite positively. In his CV submitted in 1943 to the German University in Prague, Beranek boasted of having belonged to the most extreme anti-Jewish student group in the pre-Nazi era at the German University at Prague, of having received a medal for his participation in the Sudetenlands Union with Germany, and of Nazi research institutes competing to hire him. One is, however, hard-pressed to locate unambiguously anti-Jewish animus or willful distortions in his writings about Yiddish, Jews, and Judaism. He was also publicly defended from charges of anti-Semitism by Zaltzia Landmann, a Swiss Jewish author of a best-selling popular book about Yiddish, with whom he was on friendly terms after the war. The introduction in Beranek's 1941 book is the exception, and was evidently added to a study he had initially hoped YIVO would publish. The Slavicist Dietrich Gerhardt in Münster, Germany, with whom Weinreich was on good terms, pointed out that Beranek had cited compromised scholars such as Hans Gunther, a racial researcher and eugenicist celebrated by the Nazis, in an article about Yiddish that he had clearly written before the war's end, but published only afterwards. But after meeting Beranek personally, Gerhardt found him self-aggrandizing, but more naive than malicious. In the evaluation of historian Alan Steinbeis, Beranek was, quote, incapable of recognizing that his scholarly work about Yiddish bore any connection to the catastrophe that had made the language nearly extinct in Europe, end quote. On the other hand, Beranek understood well enough that aspects of his wartime activities would undermine his attempts to rebuild an academic career. He omitted or lied about some of the most damning details of his biography as part of his post-war self-fashioning, and dropped references to Jews as a race, now a taboo subject, in his subsequent writings. Most likely, Beranek was an opportunist with an abiding interest in Yiddish, but less concern for Jews, either as individuals or as a collective, other than as an object of research useful to the field of Germanic linguistics. Revealing his moral obtuseness, he even described to Birnbaum how in the pursuit of linguistic data, he often visited the rabbi of Tirnau, Slovakia in 1943, quote, despite all the difficulties in doing so, end quote. This was a time when Jews were being rounded up for internment and deportation. Similarly, he eagerly took advantage of the presence of DPs in post-war West Germany to collect additional data for his book about the Yiddish of Pinsk. His post-war personal letters to friends and colleagues reveal that he considered Germany's defeat and the loss of its eastern territories a catastrophe, and that he bemoaned that it would take time for post-World War II Germany to recognize again the value of his work about ethnic Germans in these regions. Beranek's motivations mattered little, of course, for Weinreich. While Beranek insisted that he be judged above all by the content of his published work and his commitment to scholarship, Weinreich deemed the political context of his work equally, if not more, significant. Beranek was, in his eyes, morally complicit, having used scholarship to unethical ends, and was attempting to obfuscate his actions. Service to an explicitly anti-Semitic regime, in whatever capacity, was for Weinreich a conscious choice, and he was reluctant to acknowledge extenuating circumstances or different degrees of culpability. And even if Beranek could deny his wartime actions, wrote Weinreich in the Vorwärts, his arrogant tone and his absolute dullness in understanding the Jewish situation would be enough to keep a distance from him, end quote. In a 1947 article, Beranek stressed the moral duty of Germany, above all the field of Germanistik, German philology, to create a teaching and research facility to preserve the language before it likely disappeared. Such an act would not only reconfirm what he called, quote, the laudable reputation for universality that German scholarship enjoys, but also represent unsolicited intellectual amends to Jews as only a people of Dichter und Denker can make, a people of poets and thinkers, that is, end quote. Weinreich, the ideological Yiddishist, committed to the study of the language from the vantage point of Yiddish rather than the margins of Germanistic, could only have regarded such a statement as irredeemably patronizing. Weinreich, the author of Hitler's Professors, must have deemed it grotesque. Yet despite his abhorrence for Beranek the man, Weinreich shared Birnbaum's respect for Beranek the prolific scholar. He cited his indispensable research about Western Yiddish in his own work, even as he denigrated it privately as methodologically flawed and overreaching in its claims. Birnbaum concurred with Weinreich's sense of collective German guilt and lack of contrition, but was less categorical in condemning individuals. Birnbaum's response was no doubt conditioned as much by personal experience and temperament as by his knowledge of recent history. He treated Beranek as a colleague and publicly acknowledged his role in the resumption of Yiddish studies in German academia. Even if he harbored doubts about Beranek's character, including his degree of empathy for Hitler's victims. Beranek became the first professor specializing in Yiddish in post-World War II Germany. Not long after he delivered his inaugural lecture about Yiddish and German philology at the University of Gießen in 1961, he thanked Birnbaum on the occasion of Birnbaum's 70th birthday. In a private letter, Beranek noted that it was above all Birnbaum's interwar scholarship that had shown him what he called, quote, the thorny but therefore challenging path of Yiddish research, and thereby introduced the special position that I today occupy in German scholarship, end quote. As a final note, it may be observed that Beranek shared with Weinreich and Birnbaum not only a fascination with Yiddish, but also a sense of loss for a world no more. His was, however, the world of Sudeten Germans, who shared his sense of victimhood and injustice. He translated this loss into concrete scholarship, directing the project for a dictionary of Sudeten German and creating an atlas of Sudeten German dialects based on interviews with fellow expellees in West Germany. Ironically, at the same time, Weinreich was assisting his son Uriel, now a prominent Yiddish scholar in his own right, as well as a world-renowned linguist, in a parallel, albeit more extensive form of linguistic and cultural salvage work. Following the Holocaust, father and son were constructing with the help of colleagues the language and cultural atlas of Ashkenazic Jewry through interviews with surviving European Yiddish speakers scattered around the world. Thank you for your attention, and I look forward to your comments and questions.
Thank you, Kalman, for a really, truly fascinating lecture into a corner of Yiddish studies that I think has received little note and not much exploration. That was really, really compelling. For those who are viewing, if you have questions or comments, please leave them in the question and answer section of the Zoom chat. So I'm just curious, I know you've done work previously on Yiddish scholarship. You've worked at Prilutsky. I'm just wondering how you came across this topic and what what piqued your interest in it.
Yeah, at the risk of being described as a one-trick pony, I'll say that I encountered all roads lead to Prilutsky. I encountered a footnote that said that Beranek was involved in Prilutsky's death, his murder. I remember when we were grad students together, our professor Rachmiel Peltz mentioning that Beranek was rumored to be a Nazi. So I began to investigate. I found out that Beranek, I can't find any ties to Prilitsky, but that there was this long and complicated story about which I've only told a small part today.
Right. Yeah. I guess the things that we dealt with in graduate school never really leave us, and we continue to work on them. I have the same issue. So I'm just curious. This was, obviously a small segment of something bigger. I'm just where is this leading? What else have you
Yeah. Well, it's not leading to the obvious. The obvious, I struggled with this, was to write a book just about German scholars who became Nazis and their relationship to the Jewish scholars. But I decided to make it only part of a project. What I'm really working on is a history of a book that's sort of an intellectual biography of Max Weinreich and Solomon Birnbaum, their relationship over basically a lifetime almost, and their interactions with German culture. I mean, these are two giant scholars who were shaped by German culture, who came to Yiddish as adolescents and have parallel, but in many ways parallel, but different ideologies, similarities and differences, who really shaped, I would say, the 20th century's field of Yiddish.
Interesting. Okay, we have a couple of comments in the question and answer section. One person comments that Beranek never appears in Hitler's Professors. I think you noted that in your lecture. Also, someone is asking if you've published work on this story.
Yeah, I've published an article about this, another about Beranek specifically, and something is going to come out about Kloss in the 1920s later on, hopefully this year. And of course, my book will have a lot more to say about all this.
Right. Okay. The other, the other comments and questions aren't entirely relevant to the topic, so I guess we can skip over them for now. Most of them comment what an excellent and interesting lecture it was. One person asked how much of YIVO's collection in Vilna made it to New York. I think the answer is 465 wooden crates worth.
Yeah, you're better equipped to answer this question than I am.
Right, and a lot of it remained in Vilna, where it's now part of the Lithuanian National Library. So that doesn't.
Yeah, I'm in a sense one of several scholars who's telling a much bigger story about the transition of YIVO from Eastern Europe to the United States. And the reconstitution of Vilna's collections is obviously an ongoing story.
Right.
Some of the documents I used were things that I found online because YIVO has recently digitized them.
Right. Yes. As some people may or may not know, YIVO has an enormous digitization project that comprises the entirety of the Vilna collections, which are the collections that were shipped to the United States immediately after the war, and those that remain in Vilna as part of the Lithuanian National Library. So if you go to the, I don't know the exact name of the website, but if it's the Vilna collection, the YIVO, the Edward Blank YIVO Vilna Collections Project, you can find that this is something that's in process, and you can find and read a lot of these documents, which is really quite large. And significant. You said that this is part of a larger project of studying the reconstitution of YIVO. Another aspect that I see here is, at least in your talk today, is the history of Yiddish studies in Germany, which in and of itself is a fascinating topic. And I don't know how much you're willing to deal with that, but some of it clearly does touch on that. And, Germany is a center for Yiddish studies. So, it's interesting to note how much involvement, the figures you're researching have had, what kind of effect that they've had on that.
I mean, clearly, Weinreich and Birnbaum, the backdrop of their lives is German scholarship. YIVO was in many ways shaped by German scholarship and a response to German Jewish scholarship. Birnbaum began his career in Germany. This Germany is itself almost a character in my story. And the development of German research about Yiddish during the war and after the war is a big part of the story that I'm trying to tell. I was recently in Hamburg, where Birnbaum started his career. They have a society named for him there. And I gave a talk about him. And they've done a fantastic job with a exhibit about his life. I saw the places he lived and he taught. That's quite remarkable. You know, it's a side of the story that we tend to forget about in some ways, because Yiddish had to, in a sense, distance itself from German culture to be seen as an independent field. And these German scholars that I talked about, part of what the ones who became Nazis, part of what irritated the Jewish Yiddish scholars so much was that they were in some ways not willing to let go of Yiddish as part of the field of Germanistic. They did not necessarily accept Yiddish as an independent field.
Right, interesting. And actually there's a question here, you know, can you say more about why Nazis were interested in the Yiddish language? You know, so
yeah, I could certainly say more about that. That's a big topic. I was going to say something about this, but I had to time myself, so I had to limit myself. I did some research. You know, the obvious reasons you might think are obviously the interest in. Make sure you can still hear me. I'm not sure whether I've lost you.
No, we can hear you. We can hear you. Your image is frozen, but we can hear your voice. Oh, maybe we can hear you. All right. Unfortunately, Kalman's Wi-Fi is not working properly. Sorry about that. Kalman, are you back?
Hi, I'm back.
Oh, you're back. Okay, good. All right.
Okay.
Oh. Maybe
yeah, do you have me?
Yeah.
Okay.
It's sort of in and out.
Okay, so I'll try to answer the question briefly. I found rumors of Nazi research institutes to train spies to appear as Jews. And I also found stories of SS men who knew Yiddish and used it to lure Jews out of hiding. Now, I don't think the research institutes actually existed. There was no, as far as I can tell, systematic effort by Nazi Germany to train agents to impersonate Jews or to use Yiddish to trick Jews in some way. There were, of course, SS men who did use Yiddish, but they probably were SS men who grew up in Eastern Europe, who knew Yiddish from childhood, knew it well. But there was a scholarly interest in Yiddish as part of the so-called anti-Semitic field of Judenforschung, anti-Semitic research about Jews, knowing everything about Jews and setting the record straight that the Jews had perverted, according to a Nazi perspective. So I didn't find that there was a hell of a lot of Nazi scholars who wrote about Yiddish. They were able to, I hate to be vulgar, but they were able to murder Jews without using Yiddish. And they could certainly use Eastern European Jews to translate into Yiddish as necessary. But they did have this scholarly thoroughness that there was a branch of their studies that was interested in Yiddish. Beranek's work, just to give you an example, Beranek reviewed a book about Jewish names for a Nazi journal. You need to be able to identify Jews, so you have to be able to explain Jews' names. How do you tell who is a Jew? It's not very simple, it turns out. As our audience probably knows, Jewish names are not obviously Jewish all the time. So Beranek became a specialist in this kind of thing. So this is part of the Nazi enterprise.
Right, interesting. So in connection to that, and I think you answered this in part, someone asks, how does current or modern German scholarship view these men? And I think you answered in part by the fact that there's an institute named for Beranek.
So not Beranek. Well, the sort of bigger answer is since the 1990s, German scholars have really taken an interest in those who were not scholars who were Nazis, uncovering that these people went on to careers. They went on to, many of them went on to quite prominent careers. There's this wild story about someone David Fishman writes about named Gotthard, who was there in Vilna and in Riga, posed as a Jew after the war, and became part of the Rosenberg Stab, and then became a professor in Berlin. Very much, I checked his archives, he was very much afraid of being kidnapped by the Israelis because he knew people were being seized. But no one talked about this for decades publicly until the 1990s, that these people's backgrounds were investigated and people began to talk about it. But because we're not talking about a large number of people, the Yiddish scholars, almost nothing has been said or written about them, about their backgrounds. There's some work, but not a tremendous amount. I found that most of the scholarship mentions that there are questions, but doesn't say this is the story. That took a lot of archival digging to fully tell the story, and I'm sure there's more to be told, at least about Beranek.
Right, and in line with that, someone also asks, what sources did you use to reconstruct Berenek's wartime activities?
Yeah, this was took a lot of writing to archives around the world. I used Czech and Slovak archives, German archives, YIVO archives, and the Birnbaum family archives here in Toronto.
Okay.
Yeah, thank goodness for secret police.
Right. yeah, it's sort of standard, archival research. It's all over the place. Someone else asked questions, wondering if the response to Berenek's if the response to Beranek soured the relationship between Weinreich and Birnbaum.
No, it didn't. They had their own complicated dynamic, but it didn't sour the relationship. It was something they didn't talk about after a certain point. I think Weinreich really said all he had to say about Beranek in the 1950s, but he kept getting requests from scholars asking about him, and he had to keep re-engaging. But he was prepared to move on to other things. He had to write the history of the Yiddish language. This was his big mission in life.
Right.
And Birnbaum also felt that he was in a race against time to say everything he had to say, although he had a very long life and he said a lot.
Right. I think we'll take one last question, and it's really only tangentially related, but it's from the famous Fruma Moore.
Hello,
she's asking what the relationship of Solomon to his father Nathan after Nathan became involved with the Aguda. I mean, he was involved with the Aguda from the beginning, but
what was Solomon's relationship to Nathan after he became involved with the Aguda?
Yeah, I mean, if that, I think she's asking if that changed things.
No, the relationship between, this is a story, by the way, of very much of fathers and sons. It's Nathan and Solomon, it's Max and Uriel. Nathan and Solomon had a very strong relationship. They wrote each other multiple times a week, sometimes multiple times a day. They were ideologically in step, so to speak. Nathan takes his distance from the Aguda and Solomon takes his distance from the Aguda. After the war, Solomon really withdraws largely from political type of propagandistic work. And he sours with the Aguda, even more so. He believes it's become too pro-Zionist. But their father and son were very much in step.
Okay, thank you. All right, I think this is a good point to end it. Thanks very much, Kalman. Thanks to the Workmen Circle Patt Fellowship, which funded this lecture and the research that you did at YIVO. Once again, if any of you would like to support these things, please feel free to contact me or anyone at YIVO about making donations, and also become members. Every little bit helps. All right, thanks everyone, and
thank you.
Good day until next time. Take care.